With Allied casualties and surrenders reaching well over 500,000, the British Expeditionary Force is becoming encircled by the Germans and have their backs against the coast.
You've got Belgium collapsing on the northern flank. You've got the Germans pressing from the east. You've got them pressing from the south. They're in this tiny little bubble. And everyone's sort of going, oh my God, this is an absolute nightmare.
The French were floundering. Morale was poor. French army's units were collapsing in the face of these German attacks. And the British saw themselves basically shackled to a corpse.
As the German onslaught continues to overwhelm the Allies, Churchill flies to Paris to meet with Prime Minister Pώll Reïnó and the French High Command.
The reason he's doing that is so that he can try and get the French War Committee to try and kind of stiffen their resolve. Go, come on, keep going. There's got to be a solution to this. Don't be defeatist. Don't throw in the towel yet.
But Reynaud tells Churchill that the situation is hopeless and warns that his cabinet colleagues wish to start peace talks with Hitler. With Hitler's men gaining ground, the British Expeditionary Force are retreating towards the coast in droves.
It's really a race against time for the Germans. They have the cream of the Allied armies in a trap, and they're not going to let them out of that trap.
So they really felt like we will destroy the British and the French army here on the beach, and we will have won a decisive victory we couldn't even dream of a couple of years ago.
As thousands of Allied troops rush towards safety, thousands of others are ordered to block the German advance on Dunkirk by defending key positions such as Calais.
Every hour that they managed to save at Calais was invaluable up at Dunkirk.
Commanding the Allied troops is 41-year-old Brigadier Claude Nicholson.
Churchill sent a telegram to Nicholson in Calais saying that the eyes of the Empire are upon you. To have that sent to you when you're a commander, really, it meant that you just could not surrender.
3 days of brutal fighting takes place between Hitler's panzer divisions and the Allies, who are outnumbered 3-1.
Churchill does have the opportunity to evacuate them, but he says, no, I want you to hold out and keep fighting.
It was one of the most difficult decisions that Winston Churchill had to take in the whole war. He said it made him physically sick to have to give the order, but nonetheless, he gave it. It was an example of his leadership.
The outcome for Brigadier Nicholson and his soldiers was that none of them get away. They're either killed, wounded, or captured.
After surrendering, Nicholson is sent to a POW camp in northern Germany.
And the really sad thing about him is that he ended up committing suicide when he was in captivity. And it seems as though he felt he had let the country down. And yet, if you look at the situation, if you look at what he did, he was a hero.
After returning from France, Churchill meets with his war cabinet in London. Strongly opposed to the war against Germany is Foreign Secretary Lord Halifax, who wants Churchill to explore peace terms with Hitler.
Lord Halifax is popular among his peers in the House of Lords. He has many supporters in the Tory party, and another admirer is King George VI. Halifax is actually not only his party's first choice to be Prime Minister, but also the King's. He decides that he's not up to the job, and therefore he stands aside.
Whilst Halifax believes that Hitler will only want a few British territories if peace is brokered, Churchill fears Hitler will demand control of the Royal Navy and much more.
The war cabinet in the UK is hopelessly split. And the reason it's split is because there are people in it like Halifax who are great realists and think, well, the war can't be won now, we need to start negotiations. And there are also diehards, of course, like Churchill, who feel we've got to keep fighting to the end. And if we don't, what we'll get out of this will be worse than if we keep going.
On the 25th of May, with no authorization from the war cabinet, Halifax meets the Italian ambassador at the Foreign Office and asks whether Italy might mediate a ceasefire with Germany. Halifax is not alone in thinking this is the best course of action. Joseph Kennedy, JFK's father, is US ambassador to Britain. He too believes that Britain is finished and has tried to sound out the German ambassador about peace talks. Like Halifax, Kennedy has no government authorization to do this.
It's hard to believe what Churchill was up against at this time. Not only does he have the challenge from the Germans trying to destroy the BEF, he also has the enemy within trying to encourage him to negotiate peace.
Around the same time that Halifax and Kennedy are exploring illegitimate peace talks, Churchill decides that British soldiers can no longer fight on in France. They must be evacuated.
The British haven't really got any choice in the matter, because it's either kind of ferry themselves back across the channel back to Britain and safety, or put their hands up in the air and become prisoners of war.
If the British Expeditionary Force were not brought back, they would either be captured or slaughtered. And Churchill understood that you simply couldn't allow 250,000 men to fall into German hands. That would essentially be the end of the war.
With the Germans dangerously close to trapping the British Expeditionary Force, Churchill calls upon a trusted ally to oversee the rescue operation, Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay.
Churchill knew Ramsay to be an extremely calm commander, which, of course, was going to be tremendously important in this operation. He knew that he was going to be able to get the job done.
From officers situated deep in the tunnels beneath Dover Castle, Ramsay and his team begin planning the evacuation, codenamed Operation Dynamo.
When Ramsay is looking at how to get the British Expeditionary Force away, well, initially, he can see these 3 large ports: Boulogne, Calais, Dunkirk. So that's how it's going to be done.
Within days, the German Air Force annihilates the ports at Boulogne and Calais.
Through a process of elimination, Boulogne, Calais are lost. It becomes only Dunkirk that can be used, so there really was no choice in the matter. And bear in mind that Dunkirk was a very busy port. So, you know, there was a lot of scope for evacuating the British Expeditionary Force from such an active port.
Situated near the border of France and Belgium, and 40 miles from the English coast, Ramsay instructs a large fleet of Royal Navy ships ranging from destroyers to gunboats to prepare to head for Dunkirk. By now, over 300,000 Allied soldiers are fleeing towards the beach, hoping to be rescued. But with the Germans quickly closing in, the clock is ticking.
I mean, the expectation is that they've probably got 48 hours at most before the Germans completely cut them off. And in 48 hours, the expectation is, if they're lucky, they'll manage to get 45,000 men away.
So these were best-case scenarios.
This is the largest coastal evacuation, in history up to this point. Frankly, it must have looked almost impossible that they were going to pull it off.
With just 48 hours to go, the Royal Navy ships get straight to work. But by the following evening, only 7,500 men have been rescued.
Very slow, because you've got to decant the soldiers who are waiting patiently on the beach in lines. They can't be panicked, they can't all rush the boat.
Well, when you have some few 100,000 people crowding onto the beach, it's a scramble. It's incredibly difficult, just simply physically getting toward the water, let alone getting onto a boat.
And they are sitting ducks. It must have been utterly terrifying.
Hitler's panzers are now within a matter of miles of Dunkirk when they receive extraordinary news from German High Command.
an order goes out to halt the panzers. And at the front, they're all absolutely spitting about this. Like, what? You know, we're just crossing the canal. You can't make us halt now.
One of the first to receive the news is Heinz Guderian.
Guderian was rushing towards the channel, and then he gets an order to say the panzer attack has to stop. And he's really furious. When you're going forward, attacking, and you see the enemies fleeing, then you get some rush of enthusiasm. And when an order arrives that you should stop, you don't understand why.
One of the reasons the halt order is actually put in place is to allow the infantry who've been lagging behind the armour to catch up. They were thinking, we've got another battle to fight against the remaining French armies, and we need to keep as many of our panzers intact as possible.